How do we think about that whole construct in terms of putting the employee at the center?
Navigating the uncertainty is also trusting your leadership.
How do we make sure that we are really trying to and considering all areas of diversity and inclusion?
Leaders have to amplify their leadership impact. They have to be more present than they think they should be.
Hi, and welcome to the ERUPT podcast, your go-to destination exploring HR and tech leadership. I'm James Ballard, I'm co-founder at Vanapona. Alongside my colleague Magnus, we're excited to transport you back to our fantastic ERUPT Excellence in Leadership Conference from 2023. Today we're bringing to life one of the thought-provoking discussions we had at the conference with some of the world's leading professionals. If you prefer to watch the sessions, these are still available for free on www.goerupt.com. Enjoy! So we're back talking about building a thriving culture while scaling. I'm delighted to be joined by three people coming from different parts of organisations. I've got Paul Murphy, Chief People Officer at Laser Digital, looking very smart this morning, Paul.
Oh, that's very kind of you to say so, James. Thank you. So do you.
Thanks, mate. Abhishek, great to see you, CTO at Vivy GmbH. Great to have somebody from the tech side joining us. Hi, Abhishek.
Thanks, James. Thanks a lot.
And finally, but not least, we have Sonja, who's currently Strategic Projects People Operations at Miro. Hi, Sonja.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Great. Okay, so we're going to be covering what does a thriving culture actually mean? Are we focusing on business success, team collaboration, or individual achievements? We can say that long-term success could be defined by building an effective culture, having knock-on effects on attracting and retaining top talent, boosting employee engagement, improving productivity. And then as we look hopefully into the other side of uncertain times, potentially not, and companies start to bounce back, many organizations hopefully are going to be looking to scale again. What's the culture that we're hoping to achieve? When do you define the moment to bring in the talent and make the right hires? How do we bring our existing employees on the new journey? And how do we ensure we fail fast and build quickly? We also have a Q&A open, so anybody listening, if you want to pose questions at any time, put that in and we'll try and get that to the panel itself. So I've posted some big statements there, guys. Thriving culture obviously is super important, whether or not we're scaling or not. We've been talking earlier about how difficult it is to engage, make productive, keep happy people, especially when times are hard. So I'm really interested to see what your maybe starting block would be about how you define your culture and what does that actually mean to an organization. So that's to everybody. Paul, do you want to start off on that? How do you define a culture within a business and when do you do it?
Yeah, I mean, how do you ever really define culture? I mean, you can set out at the start of a journey, and you believe that you have a culture that you want to follow, you want your organization to follow, and we know culture is driven by all those people within an organization, and it's often driven from the top as well. But a culture is always evolving. There's new people coming in, there are new ideas, new environments, and there are different cultures within a single organization. There are different businesses, different locations, and it's the sum of those individual parts which I believe kind of creates that culture. But you also have to work about, is a culture aspirational? Is it where you want to be, and how do you get there? Or is it a perception, a view from the outside? I think something I've seen kind of moving from a large corporate into a startup has been, I've interviewed people when we've talked about conduct and culture, and it's fairly set views around the culture of bigger organizations, bigger corporates being sometimes a little bit slow, a little bit cumbersome, overly bureaucratic, versus the startup where you can fail fast and things move very quickly. So I think there's a lot of questions to be asked about culture in general, and you can't just kind of come into an organization and say, right, from now on, this is going to be our new culture. There's an awful lot of moving parts that have to be played with. So I don't know if that gives an idea. I may have kind of asked more questions to your question than given you answers.
No, I like it. I really like it. Sonja, do you think we define culture for what we want to be or who we are? You know, what's your view?
I think it's both, and I think Paul gave a great overview of what is culture, and for me, it's the observation of behavior that happens. Everyone in the organization behaves, and this makes the culture. So I like to distinct between define and describe. So I think you can describe the culture, everything that you see is happening, and then you can define certain values or aspirational behavior, guidelines through policies or other things to influence the culture. But you can't define, okay, this is, what is happening and then expect it to happen. So it's more, what is the input, what's the influence into the system? And then it's always, for me, I'm very passionate to see what people make of it, because, you can't say it will be this. You can say this is aspirational, and then, work on the culture. But it's more about describing the culture. And to the question, when do you do it? I think culture is always in evolution, and especially when companies scale, there are a lot of moments or events that have an impact on culture, be it requirements change on how do we work together, because a larger company requires different level of processes defined, or communication. And so when you scale maybe through inorganic growth and acquire a company, they have a different culture. So how do you merge this? So it's always in development. And I think the best is to describe what is, define the aspirational behaviors, and then be open to let it evolve over time.
And Abhishek, that sort of leads us on to our next question as well. I obviously take your thoughts about the definition of culture, but I really like this notion of evolution, that we are evolving as businesses all the time. So what's your view on that? How do we keep culture fresh and engaging for employees as you grow? What's the challenge of microcultures, Abhishek?
Yeah, perfect. I think James, for me, this is one of the important aspects, and I am currently in the organization where I am facing it, where you evolve and this microculture component comes in. How we keep it fresh, to be honest, it's driven by the leadership, and of course you co-create with your employee altogether. But for me, the most important factor is the clarity you bring in. The culture is all about clarity. Clarity brings in the trust across the organization, and that basically will turn into action, because it's an intangible component. And when that's an intangible component, how you basically live it, that's basically then action. How you talk informally, how you act, and that basically on day-to-day basis, every day you live, you talk, you breathe. That keeps that momentum, that keeps that action, and that keeps that culture basically fresh. Microculture, I've, to be honest, have had an experience on both the part where it was beneficial. On other side, it was more or less a blocker. I've experienced both at first hand. To be honest, you have to pass on. When you bring in the new talent and when you're scaling in, you have to keep that momentum going in. You bring in new leadership, you bring in mid-level leadership, you have to pass on whatever culture has been established. And that's basically where you can balance it out or manage that culture component, which basically grows in the team. And that's basically what I believe, that these two important factors keeps your culture fresh and alive and kicking.
Yeah, Sonja, have you got perspective on how you keep that freshness?
Yeah, I think keeping the dialogue, so maintaining inclusiveness and inviting people to share their view, talk about the culture, and not make it a manifesto or a set of rules. So this is how we, do it, but really engage, role model this engagement with people, so that they feel comfortable to also share their view on the culture, what works, where there are tensions, and also inviting people to co-design certain people programs where the cultural elements are essential, be it an onboarding or so. And you can do a survey, you can do focus groups, but really role model this engagement. And I think that is the base for people to engage with the culture and to contribute to it. And maybe one piece on the microcultures I want to say is that I find microcultures per se are not bad. It gets maybe it becomes a problem when it hinders collaboration cross-functionally, or the different microcultures have a certain language that others don't understand. So I think microcultures happen, they're normal, but it's about how do we define a common language for those terms, for those things that relate to effective collaboration.
I suppose those microcultures are more likely to happen as the bigger we get, that you're going to get more functionally aligned sort of units. That's interesting. First question coming in from Melanie. Thanks, Melanie. And she's asking, what are the panel's views on culture versus climate in scaling companies? So that's an interesting point of view. Paul, what do you think? Culture versus climate?
Yeah, I mean, the environment you work in, it's a good point. What is the view? I think the culture is perhaps, you might view something you can control versus climate, which is obviously things that are kind of might just affect you. And I think that when it comes to the culture of organizations operating in certain climates, it can sometimes be difficult. You want your culture, whatever it might be, but you want it to be something which is attractive to, whether you're using it as a tool for attracting people or attracting clients. You want, people to think, that's a place I want to, do business with or want to work in. But then when it becomes, I know we talked about whether it's aspirational or whether it's kind of real life, but who's portraying the messaging of that culture out into the client market, or something, James, I'm sure you'd be more interested into the talent pools. Because if you're operating and speaking to lots of potential new talent, what you want to onboard, you want them to fully understand what your culture might be. And that can sometimes be difficult in making sure that the correct messaging is going out into those talent pools. So I think I'm probably going off on a tangent slightly versus the original question versus climate, but I think it's a very valid point as you try and work out, okay, do we have to evolve our culture because of the climate? And I think absolutely, we absolutely have to. And I think we've actually, sorry to build on that a little bit, the culture, the conduct and culture, or just the fact that we're talking about it now, it's moved very much from a nice to have, okay, this is the kind of thing which organizations, more developed organizations talk about, to the regulators being right up front and central about, you need to ensure your organization has a culture and a code of conduct which means that you are operating with integrity, with responsibility, etc. And it's suddenly become a kind of nice to have by more advanced organizations too. You will have, and we're actually going to check. Regulators are making sure that you have that. Yeah.
Abhi, what's your feelings on culture versus climate, and how you take that into account when you're building an organization?
To be honest, I personally believe that it's directly proportional. That's how I deal it. So as per climate, you have to evolve your culture, and if it's more or less, if you're not adopting, then of course you are failing behind ultimately. So that's how I personally believe. I've experienced also in the past that this is not an two opposite entity, but this is more or less as a parallel trail. And as climate changes, of course, your culture needs to be evolved.
Sonja, any thoughts?
My two colleagues described it very well. I think it needs to adjust to the environment, the climate. But I think if companies have described or distilled the essence of their culture, which makes them successful, there is a core that will remain, and then there are nuances that will be adjusted. So I think there's a risk to maybe change too drastically and then losing, the core. So I would say a company should have the essence of their culture clear, which is maybe more stable, and then being flexible and adjusting to the climate.
Yeah. Now, Paul, we've known each other for quite a few years now. It's been a pleasure to see you do different things at the Royal Bank of Canada, and now moving into being the Chief People Officer of Laser Digital, you know, different sort of challenge for you. What are the biggest challenges that you faced in building a thriving culture, as a case study, and maybe what Laser Digital is going through?
Yeah, I mean, it's been a massive change going from such a big corporate with a very strong kind of view on its culture and quite a well-known understanding. You know, people I interviewed in my previous role kind of knew the organization, knew very much what they were about, what they believed in, and also kind of talked a lot about the environment, you know, making being a place where, you know, you can be comfortable in the environment that it's in. And then moving to what is effectively a startup where you get the chance to kind of define or search to define some of those aspects. Some of the biggest issues, of course, have been the kind of predetermined views on you know, cultures of companies, as I kind of mentioned before, when it comes to corporate versus startup. You know, the bureaucracy of some of the larger corporates versus being in a startup where when you're bringing a number of different people in, people from very different environments, whether they're kind of from established corporates or very much kind of crypto natives, with very different views of operating. And so some of the big challenges, of course, has been kind of melding them. I kind of associate it very much for when we were looking at multi-generational workforces, and we were looking at generation X, Y into millennials, and you know, how we kind of brought about those different generations and got them working together when they had, no one was wrong or right on the views of the way things worked, but very different views. And I think one of the big challenges, dare I say it, with working in an organization which is quite so young, is that, you know, we're coming out of the kind of COVID and lockdown years. We're very much, everyone's heavily into hybrid working. And sometimes when we talk about, you know, making work environments comfortable to work in, it can be more difficult when everything or a lot of things are done remotely. And we need to accept, you know, flexible working styles. We need to be very kind of, managers need to be very sensitive of their individual team members. But I think sometimes there's almost an added kind of complexity when everything is being done in a virtual way. So there's not a kind of constant interaction between employees in a single working space. And obviously, you know, global organizations are going to have multiple locations as well. But I think that's been a bit of a challenge. I think the only other kind of thing I'd probably add to that is around how we ensure within a kind of growing company or a company which is scaling up quite quickly, how we ensure that as different employees come in, perhaps have slightly different views about the way we do things, you suddenly got, you know, perhaps one person coming in with an organization of 80, which is scaling up, versus the old corporate, which is one person coming in with 90,000 employees already. So the impact individuals can make and kind of impress some of their own values, etc., can be more impactful, which can be both good and bad.
That's a great case study. Abby, Vivy, yeah, tell me about the Vivy journey.
Yeah, perfect. So for Vivy journey, I started quite early stage, to be honest, and then I've seen that the kind of scale, and we are still scaling, and I've experienced that the challenge, to be honest, and I describe this challenge, or one of the biggest challenges is always the change. A law of inertia, I always put it in that way, that whatever in motion remain in motion, and when you try to bring in that change, it's difficult. It's difficult to adapt, and that basically one of the key component when you are trying to bring in a remodeled, reinforced cultural aspect where you started adding people. So that one aspect I've personally experienced, have seen it, be more or less able to manage it, to be honest, in last couple of years. And then the second aspect, I think Paul put it in nicely. there is an external factor. I think nobody basically look into that. What is that external factor? You always compare, right? That other organizations are doing in that way, and culture is a distinguished factor. It's totally different for your organization. It's completely different for other organization, and you cannot compare two culture as such. Way of working is different, and I think these two important factor when you are scaling and when you're bringing that cultural change, remodeling it or reinforcing it, you have to somehow tackle these two things. And I believe somehow at we have managed it so far.
Yeah. And Sonja, you've worked, I've seen, in the smaller organizations, but also some of the biggest, most successful scale-up success stories, in e-commerce, such as Zalando and obviously now at Miro. On the other end of the spectrum, how do you keep that culture thriving when you scaled and, a bit more mature is probably maybe the way to describe it, but certainly bigger. How do you do that?
Yeah, so what I would say is from the experiences in very different organizations in terms of size, but also how they were founded, what was their location footprint, etc. And this is, Abhishek already said, every organization is very different, but there are a couple of patterns or risks that I would see for organizations as they scale, and how to make sure that their culture keeps thriving when they scale the company. I think it's very important that the top leadership team is aligned on the how. So the culture is the how we do things, and this is visible on how do they make decisions, how do they communicate decisions, how do they behave and work together if they disagree, for example. So I would say, while I'm a fan of diversity, and I believe top leadership team ideally is also diverse, but there needs to be alignment on the how. And so, when a company scales, or maybe a smaller, a startup, founder-led, and then at some point new C-level members come in, this is changing the core team that has brought it to that point. And so this is a massive impact. So it requires, let's say, team building. It's never too less to invest into it and get the leadership team at the top aligned on the how. Then another risk or challenge can be if a company, in their scaling journey, expands to different markets, hires from a different cultural background, but also diversifies the location footprint, and how to keep the foundation and the culture consistent across the different locations, while also allowing some local cultures and local flavor to happen. So I think that's where people in organization as a function, and especially having a strategic HR partner at the top of working with the leadership team to surface the challenges and to address them. And I think that's I do some advertising for our function, people in organization, is to to complement the business view, understanding the business view, but also surfacing what's happening on the people side, the behavior side, the culture side, and what investments need to be made there to make sure that the how is working well, is thriving, because I think the culture is the tool to execute the strategy. And so that's the lever to tackle the challenges. And one other challenge that I mentioned before is all things M&A, because then you bring a certain share of different talent, different ways of working, different how into the company, and this needs to be merged, and there are different approaches, so not going there, but whenever you hire or bring in a significant share of different culture, I think that is a challenge, how to go about it, and have a strategic view on it, and decide, do we use the best of both? Is one company saying, hey, this is how we do it, and you please follow our culture? Be strategic about it and conscious, and make the investments necessary.
Fantastic. Last couple of minutes, guys. we're going through this so quickly, which is great. So, you know, obviously we've been through a really tough time economically. You know, it's been a roller coaster, I think it's fair to say, you know, in terms of the economic climate out there. I've seen a lot of, you know, clients in the recruitment world as a headhunter, you know, pause, especially in the scale-up world where, you know, protecting runway, only have a certain amount of money that they can invest. But obviously the danger with that is if you don't refresh talent, then potentially people lose motivation, or you have attrition, you're going to lose people. It's hard to recruit people. So when do you identify those moments when you do need to refresh talent? I'm going to maybe pick on you, Paul, for that, because you're probably going through that journey. How do you do that? How do you do that workforce planning piece?
Yeah, I know, and I think it's really important to keep right on top of that, and obviously, clearly, ongoing performance management is one aspect of it. But I think to pick up on the kind of the refreshing of talent, I think you're right. Just because we've gone through a tough time economically shouldn't mean that we kind of stick with everything we've got, because I don't think organizations actually kind of develop that way. We've been talking about scaling and developing culture through scaling. Scaling needs to continue. You need to kind of improve as an organization, and some of that will absolutely come from kind of new views, new ideas, having an environment where people are comfortable to raise those ideas. And quite often that will mean you do have to refresh the workforce. I'm not saying it's a complete change, because that obviously is expensive, and there are going to be individuals within the organisation who continue to bring great ideas. But we also need to think that while we we have the kind of the cultures within organisations which enables people to be open and honest and bring ideas, going back to kind of one of the challenges has been that as you scale, there are some tough conversations, there are some kind of tough situations, there are kind of environments or situations within a workplace where there'll be different ideas, and you need to, as you say, fail fast. And you sometimes, you don't make an omelette without cracking eggs, right? So there are going to be difficult, and there are people who actually have different perceptions of, what's comfortable in a work environment. Some people thrive with a bit of challenge, a bit of, criticism, and therefore, ideas improve and get better. Other people find any of that confrontation can be quite difficult to deal with. So you need to be very cognizant of those differing work styles, because it's not that one's good and one's bad, because both can kind of end up on the right journey, but you need to embrace both.
Guys, I am so sorry. We've already come to the end of the session. So, it's great that we obviously can continue this on, and hopefully we will do in further sessions as well. But Abby, Sonja, Paul, thank you very much for taking time out today to share, this really interesting sort of discussion around building and maintaining a thriving culture.